At my husband's promotion party, everyone raised a glass to his success, but when I opened my gift, it was a letter stating our home was being foreclosed on. "You should be thankful we didn't tell you sooner," my mother-in-law sneered. I quietly packed my bags and left. Days later, they called, desperate to fix things. "Hi everyone, I'm Lena, 38, married to Gavin, who's 41. We've been together for about 12 years, married for 8. Gavin works in tech and has been steadily moving up in his company. Things were never great with his family, but I always tried to keep the peace for the sake of our marriage and our home. I want to start by saying my in-laws, Sylvia and Martin, have always been tough, but I never realized how truly harmful they could be, especially when it came to money and control. I'll try to explain everything slowly, because there's a lot to unpack, and it all leads to something that felt like a living nightmare. The promotion party was held at our house last Saturday. Gavin had been working incredibly hard for this new position, and honestly, I was proud of him. I helped arrange the event, invited some friends and co-workers, and of course, Sylvia and Martin showed up dressed up, smiling and chatting like the proud parents they wanted everyone to see. The party started out pretty normal. There were speeches, glasses raised, and Gavin was beaming. He deserved every bit of the recognition. His mother was practically glowing, clinging to him and telling everyone how her son was meant for big things. But behind that perfect smile, Sylvia always had that calculating look, like she was sizing up everyone and everything in the room. Throughout the evening, I noticed her sneaking glances at me, then whispering to Martin. I tried not to let it bother me, telling myself it was just typical mother-in-law behavior. Still, something felt off. Later, after most of the guests left, and the night quieted down, Sylvia came up to me. She had this strange look on her face, a mix of smugness and something cold I hadn't seen before. "Lena," she said, "I have something for you. Consider it a token." She handed me a small, plain envelope. No gift wrap, no card, just an envelope. Curious but cautious, I slipped it into my purse, thinking I'd look at it later. Once Gavin was asleep, I pulled out the envelope and opened it. Inside was a letter from the bank. My heart sank as I read the words, "Notice of foreclosure." The letter was dated weeks ago. Apparently, the mortgage payments had stopped months earlier, and taxes on the house hadn't been paid. The bank was moving forward with foreclosure proceedings. I was in shock. How could this happen? Gavin and I both worked full-time. We budgeted carefully. The mortgage was supposed to be our biggest priority. Confused, I looked for an explanation. Just then, Sylvia walked back into the room. "So, you've seen it," she said, her tone sharp but almost amused. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice shaking. She shrugged. "We thought it was best to wait. You don't understand the complexities of the family finances. Martin and I have been managing things, making decisions for the family's future." I felt my stomach twist. "But this is our home. This affects me and Gavin." Sylvia's smirk deepened. "You should be grateful we didn't tell you sooner. It would have upset Gavin at the worst time, with his promotion." That night, I lay awake, the letter burning a hole in my mind. I couldn't trust Sylvia and Martin. They had been hiding this from us, letting our home slip out of our control. I packed a bag quietly and left the house, needing space to think. I didn't tell Gavin where I was. I needed to understand what had happened before confronting him or his family. Days passed. I stayed with a friend, trying to piece together what Sylvia and Martin had done and why. Then the calls started. Gavin was desperate, pleading with me to come home. Sylvia was cold and demanding, insisting I fix things. But I wasn't ready. This was bigger than just a missed payment. It was a betrayal. After I left, I spent the next few days trying to make sense of everything. It wasn't just the foreclosure letter. It was the way Sylvia and Martin had acted like they were in charge of our lives, our money, and even our home. I kept replaying her words in my mind. "You should be grateful we didn't tell you sooner." As if this was some kind of favor. As if hiding the fact that our home was about to be taken away from us was something I should thank them for. Knowing my in-laws could be difficult. Sylvia was the kind of woman who thrived on control and manipulation, wrapped up in her perfectly manicured nails and sharp business suits. Martin, her husband, was quieter but equally dangerous, always lurking in the background, making deals and decisions without ever letting anyone else in on them. But this was on another level. I reached out to Gavin several times during those days, but he was distant. I could tell Sylvia was in his ear, telling him what to say and how to act. Every time I called, he sounded conflicted, torn between the wife he loved and the parents he was trying to please. One evening, after a particularly tense phone call, I decided I needed to know exactly what was going on with our finances. I called our bank. After navigating the maze of automated messages and waiting on hold for what felt like forever, I finally got through to a representative. I explained the situation and asked for a detailed statement on our mortgage and property taxes. What I discovered was worse than I could have imagined. Apparently, Sylvia and Martin had taken out a second mortgage on our house without telling me or Gavin. They'd used it to cover what they called family business expenses. The payments on that loan had gone unpaid for months, dragging the entire mortgage into default. The taxes had piled up too because Sylvia had refused to approve any funds to pay them, claiming it was unnecessary for now, and for now had turned into foreclosure. I felt sick. How could they do this without us knowing, without even telling Gavin? It was clear they had deliberately kept us in the dark while making risky financial moves that threatened to destroy everything Gavin and I had built. Meanwhile, Sylvia and Martin's calls and messages increased in desperation. They realized I wasn't just going to roll over and accept whatever story they fed Gavin. One afternoon, Sylvia called me directly, her tone sharper than usual. "Lena, this is your final warning," she said. "If you don't come back and stop this nonsense, you'll regret it." I asked, "What nonsense? I'm trying to protect my family's home. You've put it all at risk." She laughed, but it wasn't warm or friendly. It was cold and dismissive. "You think we want this? This is your problem now, not ours. Gavin is on the verge of something big at work, and you're throwing a wrench into it." It was always about Gavin's career with them. Their actions, no matter how damaging, were always justified because of his success. Then came the visit from Martin. It was late evening when the doorbell rang. I hadn't expected him. I didn't want to see him, but when I opened the door, there he was, calm, collected, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I closed the door behind him, my heart pounding. "About what?" "The house," he said simply, "and the way you're handling things. Sylvia and I have been trying to protect you both." I felt anger rise. "Protect me by putting me on the street," he sighed, like I was a child who didn't understand. "There are bigger plans here, Lena, plans that require sacrifices. We handled the loans because Gavin isn't ready for this part. You need to trust us." I stared at him, feeling the walls close in. "Sacrifices," I echoed. "I'm not the one who should be sacrificing. Gavin and I worked for this house. You took it from us." Martin shook his head, calm but cold. "You're making this personal, and it shouldn't be. If you want to save your marriage and your home, you need to come back, cooperate, and stop making waves." I realized then just how little they saw me, an obstacle, a threat to their carefully controlled world. They didn't care about Gavin or me as people, only about what we represented, a tool for their ambitions, a way to keep power within their family. I told Martin I wasn't going back, not until I got answers. Silence filled the room for a moment, then he left, his footsteps echoing down the hall. That night, I sat on the couch, staring at the letter again. The foreclosure deadline was fast approaching. If we didn't act, we'd lose everything. I started looking for ways to stop it, talking to lawyers, researching my rights, trying to figure out how Sylvia and Martin could do this without getting away with it. I was scared, overwhelmed, but I was also determined. This wasn't just about a house, it was about standing up to the people who thought they could ruin my life without consequences. Meanwhile, Sylvia's messages became increasingly aggressive. "You're tearing this family apart," she accused in a text. "You're making Gavin miserable. You're selfish." It was all manipulation, trying to wear me down, make me feel guilty, but I wasn't going to back down. A few days later, Gavin showed up at the place I was staying. He looked worn out, like he hadn't slept in days. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. I nodded, waiting for him to explain. He told me Sylvia and Martin had been pressuring him non-stop. They wanted him to convince me to stop fighting, to let the foreclosure happen so they could restructure the finances without me involved. I felt tears prick my eyes. Gavin was caught between me and his parents. I wanted to reach out to him, to say everything would be okay, but I wasn't sure if he was still his own person or just their puppet. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I found out the second mortgage was part of a larger scheme. Sylvia and Martin were funneling money from family assets into a separate business venture they never told Gavin about. The risk had been theirs alone, and when things started failing, they left Gavin and me to take the fall. I realized I was fighting against more than just a foreclosure. I was up against a family who didn't see me or Gavin as partners, but as pawns in their game. After days of sleepless nights and restless thoughts, I knew I couldn't just sit back and wait for Gavin's parents to ruin everything without a fight. I had to take control of the situation, no matter how tangled or terrifying it was. My first step was to get solid legal advice. I found a lawyer who specialized in real estate and family disputes, someone who understood the messy intersections of money and power within families. When I met with her, I laid everything out: the hidden second mortgage, the unpaid taxes, the foreclosure notice, and the way Sylvia and Martin had deliberately kept Gavin and me in the dark. She listened carefully, nodding. "Your in-laws have been acting with reckless disregard for your rights," she said. "They could be liable for fraud, or at least gross negligence. This isn't just a financial issue. It's a case of betrayal." For the first time, I felt like I had an ally. Meanwhile, I started gathering proof. I combed through bank statements, emails, and any documents I could get my hands on. With every new detail, the picture became clearer. Sylvia and Martin had been systematically siphoning money from the family accounts, making risky investments, and hiding their actions behind a wall of lies and false pretenses. I realized that weren't just careless. They were deliberately putting us in danger, so they could fund their own ventures and maintain control over Gavin. I also started documenting every interaction with them: text calls, even the times they showed up unannounced. I knew I needed to be prepared for whatever manipulation or gaslighting they might throw my way. One afternoon, Sylvia showed up at the door, uninvited as always, her face cold and composed. "We need to talk, Lena," she said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. I stood my ground. "I'm listening." She smirked, like she thought she was still in control. "Gavin and I have agreed it's best if you stop interfering. You're putting his career at risk, and that benefits no one." "I'm protecting our home," I replied firmly. "Not just his career, but our life." Her eyes narrowed. "You're making enemies of your own family. You might want to reconsider where your loyalties lie." That was her favorite game, turning everything into a choice between me and the family. But I refused to play. Days later, I got a call from an unexpected source, one of Sylvia's trusted associates who had overheard about the foreclosure mess, and wasn't entirely comfortable with how Sylvia and Martin were handling it. They slipped me information: contracts, bank transfers, notes, proof of financial misconduct and deception. I felt the power of having the truth on my side. Using this, I started quietly talking to some of the people at Gavin's work. I was careful, not wanting to create unnecessary drama, but I knew Gavin's promotion depended not just on his performance, but on his family's reputation. Slowly, I planted seeds of doubt about Sylvia and Martin's financial dealings, making it clear that if their misconduct surfaced, it could seriously damage the company's image and Gavin's standing. I wasn't out to sabotage him, but I also wasn't going to let his parents drag us down without consequences. At the same time, I began to negotiate with the bank. Armed with legal advice and evidence, I argued that the foreclosure notice was unjust, and that the second mortgage was taken out without proper consent. It was a long, frustrating process, but eventually I got the bank to pause the foreclosure proceedings. It wasn't a win yet, but it was a reprieve. Back at home, tensions were escalating. Gavin was caught in the middle, increasingly distant and stressed. Sylvia and Martin turned up the pressure, calling and texting constantly, guilt-tripping and threatening him about family loyalty and protecting our legacy. One evening, I overheard a heated phone call where Sylvia screamed at Gavin for betraying the family and accused me of being the cause of all the problems. Gavin was silent, almost defeated. It broke my heart, but I knew I couldn't back down. Now then came the moment I had been preparing for. I arranged a meeting with Sylvia and Martin, disguised as a peace talk. I walked in calm, collected, with copies of all the evidence laid out in front of me. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation," I said. Their faces tightened. "I know about the second mortgage, the unpaid taxes, and the money funneled into your personal ventures without Gavin's knowledge." Sylvia's smirk faltered for a moment. "You've crossed a line, Lena," Martin said coldly. "No," I replied steadily. "You crossed the line the day you decided to gamble with our home and our lives without telling us." I watched as the color drained from Sylvia's face. "I have all the proof," I continued, "and I've already talked to the bank and our lawyer. I'm prepared to take this to court if you don't cooperate." The room went silent for a long moment. Finally, Sylvia spoke, her voice low. "You think you can threaten us and win? You're out of your depth." I didn't flinch. "I'm not threatening, I'm protecting what's mine." Martin leaned forward, his voice ice. "You're making a mistake. This family doesn't forget." That was the moment I realized this was more than money or property. This was about power, and they would stop at nothing to keep it. But I was done being the victim. I had the truth. I had the law, and now I had the resolve to fight back. After that meeting, Sylvia and Martin's facade of control began to show cracks, hairline fractures, at first, but they deepened quickly. They were no longer the composed, untouchable forces they pretended to be. I could see it in the way Sylvia's voice quivered ever so slightly when she spoke to me afterward, and how Martin avoided making eye contact during our brief encounters. They had always operated from the shadows, weaving manipulation through half-truths and charm, but now their carefully spun web was unraveling thread by thread. They realized I wasn't bluffing. I wasn't the passive daughter-in-law they thought they could intimidate or brush aside. I had stopped playing their game. The fear they had counted on no longer existed in me, and once that shifted, everything else began to fall apart. Over the following weeks, the atmosphere around us turned heavy, icy. Every word exchanged felt like it carried sharp edges. They didn't dare confront me directly again, perhaps realizing that every sentence could become a line of evidence, but their efforts to sabotage me didn't stop. Instead, they shifted their focus back to their favorite pawn, Gavin. They ramped up the pressure on him in quiet, corrosive ways. There were late-night calls under the guise of checking in, whispered guilt trips about how family is everything, and subtle jabs about how I had changed him. Sylvia even sent a long handwritten letter to Gavin's office, something she knew I'd never see unless he brought it home. In it, she mourned the loss of the son we raised, blamed me for driving a wedge into the family, and begged him to come back to where he belonged. It was manipulative, emotional warfare disguised in flowery language and maternal concern. But by then, something in Gavin had started to shift. Slowly but surely, he began seeing the pattern, the emotional strings his parents had pulled all his life. I could see it weighing on him, the heavy fog of betrayal settling in. One evening after another silent dinner, he finally said, "Can we talk?" We sat in the living room, just the two of us, no distractions. He looked tired, more than just physically. There was pain in his expression, like a man who'd just realized the foundation he'd been standing on was cracked beneath his feet. "I didn't know," he said quietly, his voice almost breaking. "I truly didn't. They lied to me, kept me in the dark about everything, and I let them." I reached across and took his hand gently as he stared at the floor. "You're not responsible for what they did," I said softly, "but you can decide what happens now." He looked up then, eyes glassy with regret, but clearer than I'd seen in weeks. And for the first time since the promotion party the night everything collapsed, I saw my husband again. Not the confused man twisted by guilt, but the partner I knew, the man who believed in us. That conversation was a turning point. Meanwhile, my lawyer and I continued working methodically. We compiled every document, recorded every interaction, and filed a formal complaint against Sylvia and Martin. The case was built on solid ground: financial misconduct, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and deliberate misrepresentation of mortgage terms. The evidence was undeniable. There were bank statements that revealed unapproved transfers, forged consent forms with my forged signature, and internal emails from Martin to one of his business partners joking about buying time by using Gavin's name on certain paperwork. Sylvia's associate, the one who had initially reached out, agreed to testify. She provided dates, records of conversations, an insight into how Sylvia had orchestrated the manipulation under the pretense of keeping Gavin focused on his future. When the court reviewed everything, it wasn't just a legal matter anymore. It was a story of deliberate betrayal, of two people who had abused trust and power for personal gain. The foreclosure was stopped permanently. The bank, once presented with the full extent of the fraud, nullified the second mortgage and cleared the foreclosure notice. They even launched an internal investigation into how it had gotten that far without alerting both homeowners. Then came the ruling. Sylvia and Martin were legally responsible for repaying the misappropriated funds. On top of that, the court imposed additional penalties for the fraud and misconduct, including restitution fees and a formal notation on their financial records that would follow them for years. They wouldn't be able to take out another major loan without the scrutiny of a forensic audit. It was justice, not revenge. But truth finally upheld. Word of the lawsuit and court decision traveled quickly through the family and their social circle. The pristine image Sylvia and Martin had spent decades crafting collapsed overnight. Relatives who had once blindly followed them began to quietly pull away. Some even reached out to apologize to Gavin, admitting they had long suspected something wasn't right but were afraid to speak up. One of Gavin's aunts, who had remained neutral for years, sent us a message. "I'm sorry it took this long to see them for who they are. You deserved better support. You both still do." Sylvia and Martin, stripped of their influence and pride, tried to maintain contact as if nothing had happened. They sent holiday cards addressed to both of us. They left voicemails filled with concern and vague offers to talk. They even had a mutual friend approach us, asking if we'd consider mending the family. But there was no apology, no accountability, just the same old tactics dressed in new packaging. We didn't respond. Gavin and I moved forward. We took full control of our finances, refinanced the mortgage ourselves with full transparency and ownership. We cut all financial ties to his parents, no shared accounts, no overlapping obligations, and more importantly, we redrew our emotional boundaries. Our home, once on the brink of being taken from us, became our place of healing. It was quiet, peaceful, and ours. Gavin committed to therapy, determined to break the cycle of guilt and emotional manipulation. I supported him through every step, and we grew stronger, not because we were unshaken, but because we weathered the storm together. Sylvia and Martin never got what they wanted. They gambled with our security, underestimated me, and treated Gavin like a tool to be used rather than a son to be loved, and in the end, they lost. There was no forgiveness, because what they did wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated series of choices that endangered our future. They are still together, bitter and isolated. Occasionally, I hear through the grapevine about Sylvia's complaints, how ungrateful we were, how hard it is to be misunderstood. But those words no longer sting. They are no longer part of our lives. So that's how it ended. Sylvia and Martin's plans backfired completely. Their greed, manipulation, and need for control cost them the very thing they claimed to care about. Family. Gavin and I now live our lives on our own terms, free of their shadow, stronger because of what we endured. It wasn't easy, but it was worth every fight. If you're facing something similar, know this: you're not wrong for standing up for yourself. And no matter how powerful someone seems, the truth has its own weight. Justice may be slow, but it's real.